Peter is a very close friend of mine. I'll just introduce him real quick. This is Peter Klein, the director of the really interesting movie Bribe Inc., which I worked on for just a little period of time for Pete. And but Pete's claim to fame, we're gonna name drop for you here, Pete. He was one of Mike Wallace's producers, and also produced pieces for Bob Simon and he and I worked together at 60 Minutes on a lot of fun stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And recently, your last gig, you were head of investigations at NBC News.
Yeah, at NBC. I was executive editor.
Yeah, so which is pretty big deal. So you can see why I bring him on the show so I can get a little of that, nice rub off.
Classing it up.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit. I'd like to start off, so we're going to talk about Bribe Inc. in a little bit, guys. There's a trailer on it, but the important thing we'll just say right at the top, Bribe Inc. is on Jolt, the Jolt network, which is both available in Canada and the United States, and you can rent that for a couple bucks or something like that. What does it cost? Yep. There you go. And which seems like not too much for a film you put 4 years of your life into, right?
Exactly.
At this point, more, right? Probably 5 years. Which really cool story about the largest bribery scandal in history. It came out of the Panama Papers. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But Pete, why don't you tell me a little bit about, if you guys, I know I tell you guys all the time to get on the New York Times, and there's not a lot of mainstream folks left that I really want to support, but the New York Times is one of them for sure. They do amazing work all across the globe, and they're everywhere all the time. And Pete just had a piece this morning yesterday morning in the New York Times. If you guys want to go and read a great opinion piece about when you're going into a country and you think you're going to get the Americans to commit, it may not work out as perfectly as you want to. Pete, why don't you want to walk through some of that scenario a little bit for us?
Sure. I mean, that piece sort of was inspired a little bit by the first time you and I met. I remember I was going over to Iraq to do a story for 60 Minutes with Bob Simon and Tricia Doyle about the Shiites. And at that point, in 2003, there wasn't a lot of understanding about the complexity between Shiites and Sunnis and all that stuff in the States. So we wanted to do a story about what the impact of this invasion is going to be on the Shiite majority in Iraq. And I remember heading over to Iraq, and Jeff Fager, the executive producer of 60 Minutes 2 at the time, said, when you get to the bureau, you're going to meet my secret weapon. I was like, all right. Because you got to meet this guy, Jeff Newton. He's like my secret weapon. I was like, what do you mean he's a secret weapon? Because he's a print reporter, but he takes a camera and he runs into war zones. And I was like, great, another fucking asshole is gonna get me shot. And then I met you and fell in love.
You were the one who didn't get kidnapped or shot.
Exactly. I'm like the one. I'm the one who survived. You're one of my favorite people in the world. We sat on the roof of the bureau smoking hookah, and you helped me really understand some of the complexities around the Shia situation. And we interviewed Muqtada al-Sadr, and who at that point really no one had known about, except this Marine Colonel Chris Conlon, who was concerned about him, but nobody else seemed to be. And Sadr's was, the interview that Bob Simon did with Muqtada al-Sadr was one of his legendary interviews, rerun many times after he passed away, because Bob said to him, Saddam was the enemy of your people, killed a whole bunch of your relatives, etc. Isn't the enemy of your enemy your friend? And he was, no, you don't understand. Saddam was a small Satan. You guys are the big Satan. And the resentment he harbored was that during the previous Gulf War, when he was a teenager in the holy seat of Najaf, where we were sitting, George Bush Sr. said to the Shia, hey, you guys should revolt. We're going to, we got gunships. We'll stop we'll enforce the no-fly zone. We'll got your back. And of course they did. And, in the end, Saddam's forces poured kerosene on people and lit them on fire and did all sorts of horrible things. And the Americans just stood by and watched. And so it, got me thinking about what's going on right now, where with Donald Trump telling the Iranians, you should revolt. I mean, it was almost word for word what George H.W. Bush had said. And then it reminded me of what happened when my parents were in Hungary during the revolution in 1956, where Americans were saying through Radio Free Europe, in Hungarian broadcasts, you guys should revolt. We got your back. It's like this over and over and over. We keep hearing this. Cuba.
We pull that line out every 20 or 30 years.
You don't even have to rewrite it. So, that sort of historical resonance was, kind of live for me, and I thought, okay, let's look at the history going back to 56 with my parents and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Kennedy was like, hey, you guys should, brigadiers, go in there and we got your back. And then they went in there, and Bay of Pigs was pig fuck. So am I allowed to curse, by the way?
Yeah, curse your brain. Listen, we're proud of our cursing here. Right. And occasionally we get somebody on there, Peter, who says, I don't like your cursing. And we're like, you're going to have to.
I don't want you to be fined by the FCC. I know they don't like you.
The FCC, as Eminem says, won't bother me. So, yeah, I mean, and let's just go back to Hungary. I mean, Hungary was a great example of that because it was, an entire lifetime ago. Like, your grandparents were hanging out during that time period. And their situation was they put in this leader who, when the Americans didn't come through for him, they executed him.
They executed him. Yeah. No, Imre Nagy came in. I mean, Imre Nagy was the he came in as this leader of the revolutionaries, took over the country, said we're going to leave the Warsaw Pact, and he had every expectation that the Americans were going to back him up because everyone, the U.S. had been pushing that whole narrative of anti-Soviet, anti-communist, et cetera. And when that didn't happen, and you understand why it didn't happen. I mean, Eisenhower didn't want to get into a nuclear battle with USSR, a decade after World War II ended. But
they do make the commitments, and that's the problem.
Yeah,
they play both sides. Everybody accuses the Afghans of playing both sides against the Russians and the Americans. But the truth of the matter is that Americans say a lot of things that they can't back up, and it started there.
And that's exactly it. It's words are cheap. And I mean, if I promise to move your couch, to help you move your couch, and I don't show up, whatever. But if we tell a whole group of people you should revolt and we got your back, and we don't show up, they're usually revolting against pretty powerful people like the Iranians are. And the Revolutionary Guard doesn't screw around. I mean, they've killed thousands of people in the street, and they have no qualms about doing that.
And they fought Saddam Hussein in an 8-year war to a standstill. Yeah. And, at the time, the Iraqis were considered one of the bigger players militarily in the region. And, and so that takes you to, your next conflict, the Bay of Pigs. We're talking about 1,000 guys who were captured, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
that killed.
That's right. And it's regardless of political party. That's the thing. You can't just lay it all off on Republicans and making these commitments. They're not following through it. There's been a number of situations where the United States has committed things to people and not followed through on it. And it puts a bad taste in your mouth for generations. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Afghanistan was the one example maybe where you could say the U.S. did follow through. We supported the Mujahideen, we armed them, we gave them CIA support. They were successful in getting rid of the Soviets, but as soon as we didn't need them anymore, we were like, peace out, dudes, we're gone. So we know what happened there.
There's a book, well, not all of my viewers do. So there's a great book that was written. This brings us back to 60 Minutes, but there's a great book written called Charlie Wilson's War. It's here in the library somewhere.
There's a movie too.
It was right. It was made into a movie called Charlie Wilson's War, starring,
Tom Hanks
and Julia Roberts.
Yeah.
And it was a great movie. And it's funny because the writer of the book was a guy named George Kreil, who was a producer at 60 Minutes, who was, when I was hired at 60 Minutes, I think you know this story, but when I was hired at 60 Minutes, Jeff Fager, the executive producer, said to me, after we went through a long process and he determined I wasn't a lunatic, said, well, you're going to be my next little experiment. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, everybody up here thinks that you need 15 guys to do a shoot. And George Kreil was the guy who would go out in all these crazy countries and take a small team and do these stories. And in the age that we're in now with this new thing you call backpack journalism, and I was like, this has just literally been invented by, a couple dozen people around the world. And I was just riding that coattail early on. He said, well, this backpack journalism thing you do is going to show people at 60 Minutes that it's not about the resources necessarily, it's about the story. And you're going to go find me good stories. And we're not going to care if we have 10 cameras on that story. And, and he said, you're my next little George Kreil. And I was like, that's awesome. Who the fuck is George Kreil? And I remember when 60 Minutes 2 was canceled, and George was always nice to me because, I had a finicky correspondent, and he would come up to me and say, how's she doing? Blah, 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 and all stuff. And we would talk, and he would give me advice on how to deal with correspondence and so forth. And And I remember when 60 Minutes Wednesday, whatever we called it in the end, was canceled. And all these people, I think, like 75 people were laid off in one day. And I got promoted. And I think you got promoted too, or you were already on the Sunday show where I can't remember.
I was mostly on the Sunday show. I went over to the Wednesday show for a short time.
Yeah. And I got promoted while all my colleagues who were much more qualified than me got fired. And for the life of me, I couldn't, I had no idea why. But it was because I was covering military operations at a time when military operations, they needed people to know how to do that. Right. So I became his next little George Crowell, which was, I think in hindsight, was quite an honor that I'd never lived up to. But, and when the whole show was canceled, George was walking out of the building and said to me, "So what are you going to do with your life now?" And I said, "Well, I'm going over to I'm going to the Sunday show." And he goes, You're going to the Sunday show?" And I said, "Hey man, I don't believe it either. But like, I just walked in the room thinking I was going to get laid off like everybody else." And he looked at me, he took a deep breath, and he goes, "You're going to do great, man. Don't worry about it. Congratulations." He was very gracious about it. But there was probably a lot of people on the floor going, "Why the fuck is Newton going over the Sunday show?" Anyways, that allowed me to work with folks like you, which enhanced my career greatly. But
well, George was an amazing guy. I mean, incredible journalist and also just a really decent person.
Yeah,
so he sort of defied the typical 60 Minutes persona.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And then so you worked a lot with Mike, and then this story in Najaf. I think it's worth revisiting a little bit. That Muqtada al-Sadr at the time, you guys, just so you know, he was the main player in the entire country of Iraq. It depended on there was a place in Baghdad called Sadr City, I think it was named after his father.
Yeah, his father.
Yeah, but like it was called Sadr City, and that was the influence of the family. And they didn't live in Baghdad, they lived down in Najaf. And he was the Shia cleric who had the most power and most influence, and it was militarily predisposed to kill a lot of people, including Americans, if people didn't pay him proper umbrage. And I think that the fact that you even landed that interview with him for Bob was fantastic, and they played it many times in the past. So
and really, no one. I don't think there have been any other major Western TV interviews with Sadr since then. And he's still a huge player. He went over to Iran for a while. He was in Qum studying because he didn't really have, he was a relatively young guy. I think he was born in.
I think he was in his late 20s when you interviewed him.
Yeah.
But he was like 300 pounds and like a giant beard. He looked like he was about 50.
Yeah.
But
he was in his 20s.
8.
And he didn't have the age, he didn't have the education. He went over to Iran and continued studying, and then came back. And I mean, he's still. I was just in Iraq, a couple of years ago, and he still has a huge influence. The Badr Brigade is still around. In fact, I was doing a shoot, and we had to like put the shoot together at the last, run back to the truck at the last minute because the Badr Brigade was coming, and there was, people were afraid that they're gonna, at least try to extort us, if not, whatever, do something bad to us. But he's still a really powerful guy and a very influential politician, and sort of has been brought into the mainstream. But back then he was, in 2003, he was a nobody. No one really paid attention to him except other Shia. And he'd go, give a Friday prayer at the Imam Ali Mosque, and whatever he said, people would do. If he said go to the streets, they go to the streets. Right. In 2004, he led two insurgencies, and so he was sort of an outsider, but he's kind of come inside now.
Yeah, well, it helps when most of the Americans leave the country. He really did not like us there, and you mentioned that it was probably the last major interview that's been done with him. You probably forgot about this a little bit, but when we had our team there, Richard was kidnapped, which you did the story on his kidnapping. We had a person that was working for me named Richard Butler, who I think I've mentioned a couple times in the past, guys. He was working for me and in Basra, and working to get another interview with Muqtada al-Sadr. And Muqtada al-Sadr had agreed to meet with us to talk about that. And we knew that, sorry to sidetrack a little bit, Pete, they love these stories, but we flew Richard into Basra, and we knew, Richard and I talked about it on the phone. We said, look, if anybody's going to try to kidnap you, at the time kidnapping is really high in that part of Iraq. They're going to kidnap you in Basra, and you land so late at night, we can't have you travel at night, so we have to put you up in a hotel. You're going to be there like 6 hours, then you're going to be in a car on the way to see Muqtada al-Sadr with the Badr Brigade taking care of you. And we had that all arranged, and we had the Badr guy who was in Basra taking care of him. And they went to the hotel, and 2 hours after they arrived and went to sleep, another insurgent group who wasn't in charge up until very recently at that point, came from and kidnapped Richard, so we were literally trying to do that next interview with him, and one of our team was kidnapped. And the story behind that, because you helped tell it and produce it for 60 minutes.
And I reached out to Sutter throughout that whole time when Richard was held, asking, did you guys do this? Are you behind this? Can you help us? And they were like, no, we had absolutely nothing to do with this.
Yeah, they were very clear about the fact that they didn't have anything to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. I mean, it was, the guys had Hezbollah ringtones. Like, it was a whole different faction, but he had no control over it.
And it was also the local militia who wore uniforms who had him, because we had intel all the way through his captivity, which lasted at least 2 months, probably closer to 3, until we eventually got him back. And the way we got him back is he was rescued. We'll tell this story some other time on our paid Substack, but he was rescued, and they shot everybody in the building, who was trying to defend him when the team went in to get him. It was actually an Iraqi unit that went in and rescued him and was shooting people, and he couldn't walk anymore. You remember that, because he'd been handcuffed and flex cuffed and everything for all these months. And so they had to he's 6'3", and they had to drag him down the hallway because he couldn't walk as they were shooting people to get him out. So it was a whole thing. But that tells you the extent by which when you talk about the mainstream media and you hear Pete Hegseth say things like, you don't know what it's like in a war zone. That fucking, every time he said, I want to crush him every time he says that, because we've had members of our team kidnapped, members of our team sexually assaulted. I've had friends of mine, like my old roommate Chris Hondros, who was killed in Libya, and Brent Renault, who the film, it's out now, called Armed Only with a Camera: The Life and Death of Brent Renault, which I helped produce. It infuriates me when these guys talk down to the media, who go and do things that they would never in their life be able to do or dream of doing. And they wear that National Guard major patch on their sleeve as though they know what they're doing in these conflict zones. And that's the guy running the war effort in Iran. And which brings us back to the point, which is that, on the one hand, you have Trump saying, it depends on which day you ask him, but on what day you ask him, he might say, hey, we need regime change here, and we encourage regime change. And then you have Netanyahu saying, I'm glad Donald Trump is behind us for regime change, in Iran. And then Pete Hegseth says, no, this is not a regime change thing. We're just here to punish people. So there's no messaging that's consistent, which is very unusual for any White House, to not have consistent messaging, at least know where they're going and what their goals are. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, look, as you know, one of the sort of sayings in military is, we're always fighting the last war. And I think at the leadership level, I think presidents and other leaders are also, they're sort of enamored with the last thing that they did well. And I think we're all like that, right? I mean, I think that's kind of a human nature to some extent. And so the last thing that the Trump administration did on this kind of level militarily was Maduro. And they, on one level, you could say it was a success, because they basically got rid of one bad guy, and didn't disrupt everything. They didn't, they didn't do like an Iraq de-Baathification, right? Like there are a lot of reasons Iraq's been such a mess, but one of them is because they just got rid of the entire infrastructure that was running the country, corrupt as it was. And so what's going to fill that void? It's just an empty, American police chief in New York is like training people how to do push-ups. Like, that's not going to, recreate the entire, infrastructure of Iraq. But in Venezuela, we got rid of Maduro and left everybody else, and sort of browbeat them to hone to American interests. And so Trump has been talking about, like, we can do that in Iran. We got rid of the, Ayatollah Khamenei, and, we don't have to get rid of everybody else. We just kind of pressure them into doing what we want. That doesn't, Venezuela is not Iran. Iran is not
military. You're going the same direction I am, but I want to get one line in here that makes me seem half smart. Venezuela's military is not the same as the Iranian Republican Guard, and I'm sure that's where you were going.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge country of almost 100 million people. Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to make that comparison, but that's what Trump is making, and I think some of the other people are making, that on one day, as you say, like, because one day they're like, no, we just got rid of one guy, and he's a troublemaker, and we'll just kind of figure the rest out. And other times they're saying regime change.
But it's not. And the other thing that's interesting that I've been saying a little bit to some of our subscribers and our followers on Facebook, this is two different situations in another way, which is that one is an ideological religious government, fundamentally religious government, and the other is kind of a bunch of thugs who just want power.
Yeah.
And those two different scenarios breed way different. You can't fight them you can't fight these wars the same way. You have to have smart people understand the culture, what's going on there, because what is very difficult to overthrow, we've seen in many conflicts here in the past, is the ideology. You have fundamentalist Muslims, Shiite Muslims, who have a very strict ideology as it relates to the West and as it relates to Islam. They're not going to change their ideology because you take out their leaders.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the mistakes we make. And look, I mean, let's flip it on ourselves. I mean, you're Canadian and I'm in Canada right now, but we're also both Americans. So flip it on the US. I mean, I think there's a sense that people who don't like Donald Trump and don't like MAGA, well, when Trump is gone, everything will go back. That's not how things work. There's an ideology that's grown and gotten really powerful, that's sort of seeped into the whole government infrastructure in all branches. So it goes all the ways.
Peter, how would you describe the I don't want to put any words in here. I'm just going to ask you a question. When you look at the press coverage at this point of this is now 6 days in, or 5 days in, 6 days in, how would you describe the press coverage for this and the necessity for, because we've embedded, we've been with troops, we had free reign on the battle space, and now we've got nothing. That we're actually getting video from people inside Iran who are able to get stuff out, and that's it. And then stuff when somebody's in Kuwait and a plane falls out of the sky and somebody's got their camera, their iPhone up, and they're sending that and they're putting it out on the internet. And all these media organizations are ripping it off. They're putting it on the air and they're putting the pundits on the air from New York and all these other places. And they're just talking about stuff. There's no on the ground reporting. I'd like you to maybe address that for us.
Sure. I mean, I think it's worth looking at the history. Actually, to plug another piece, I did a piece for the Globe and Mail a couple of weeks ago about the whole situation with Don Lemon and the sort of him getting arrested and questions about, was he being a journalist, being embedded? And I explored the whole issue of being embedded. But, obviously you've been far more embedded than I've been. I've actually really avoided being embedded in most instances for a variety of reasons. But
mostly the food.
What's that?
Mostly because of the food.
Yeah, well, the MREs kind of suck. No, I mean, look, I didn't like the control of being embedded. I've never really enjoyed being embedded, and I guess nobody really does. But I mean, you benefit from it. But it all goes back to Tori Clark, right? So Tori Clark at Pentagon came up with this idea, whatever she was, this communications person, the assistant secretary of communications. Tori Clark came up with this idea of creating the embedding program, and I think they didn't want to be dealing with, back in Vietnam, Bob Simon would talk about these stories of just wandering, the battlefield. Morley Safer was like discovering incredible human rights abuses by just talking to soldiers, right? Talking to villagers. They didn't want
to drive out somewhere and talk to people and then come back and file a story, and the Pentagon wasn't even knowing what was going on until it was on the air.
And I mean, same thing. I think, you were in Kosovo, I was in Yugoslavia. Like, it was the same thing. You just reported. Like, you weren't controlled that way. And so being able to report on war unfettered is dangerous, but it's freeing. And you're, frankly, be able to get better stories. Tori Clark decided with the Gulf War in 2003, there's going to be this system. With Afghanistan and the Gulf War, there's going to be this organized system, control, offering journalists, we'll take you in the helicopter, we'll give you MREs, we'll give you a bed, cot to sleep on. So it was good for us as journalists because it was sort of ready-made. And, we're not going to control what you're saying. We're not going to, like, most of the time censor you, but
here's some ground rules.
Here's some ground rules, and this is where you're going to be. And, if they're going to let you in, they're going to let you in. If they're not, you're screwed. But at least there was a system. And I do feel like we've sort of gone, while it was a compromise, it allowed some incredible reporting that you've done and many of our colleagues have done over the years on on the military, you're right that it feels like now, both with Gaza and with Iran, we're flying blind. I mean, Gaza was,
I
we
think
couldn't even.
Israel wrote the new playbook on how to deal with the media. It's just do not let them in, and if you see them running around in Gaza with the word press on their chest, shoot them.
Yeah.
And I think that it was a terrible disservice to the media, but they're not. It's not like they're trying to figure out a way to be fair.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to understand is, like right now I saw Clarissa Ward, who I'm a big fan of. I'm sure you are as well. Clarissa Ward was a 60 Minutes correspondent for a couple of years at 60 Minutes. And the worst thing that they ever did is not offer her whatever she wanted to stay. When she was
doing the best reporting in Syria, and then they didn't renew her contract.
Syria and all those places, and she was killing it. And I at one point I said to her, like, and I was working with some pretty good war journalists, and I said, like, you right now are the best war journalist on the planet. And I believe that to this day. And, I'm looking today at the coverage of anybody going in, and I see CNN, and guess what? Clarissa Ward's on her way in. And so that's the kind of, reporting you have to do sometimes independently, because this thing of being embedded all the time is not great, and but it does allow you access to the front lines, which is great. If you want to see frontline fighting, and you're willing to be able to do that, and you're not stupid, you're not going to get killed for the most part. If you have knowledge and you know how to utilize it, it's a good opportunity if you don't mind getting shot at or blown up. But the independent reporting is equally, if not more, critical, because you may not have the same access to front lines, but you have access to regular people a lot more, and you can go talk to the people impacted. You could go into Iran right now and talk to the families. If you could get in. And there's some CNN's got some visas now to get into Iran. They're driving across right now, and they're going to be talking to the families of the loved ones who were killed in that strike at that elementary school.
Yeah,
and there's nothing the United States can do about it except drop bombs on them, which I would not at this point rule out. Pete Hegseth's commitment to journalism was shown early on when he basically threw away the Pentagon press corps, which right now would be very useful to the American public to have. If there was the Tom Bowmans of the world, or David Martins of the world were still in there asking questions like, what are you doing? When is it going to end? All these kinds of questions you want to ask every day. And there was somebody there to answer them. Now there's nobody. It's just whenever he wants to do something. And I was reading yesterday, Jim Acosta had a wonderful little piece on there on his Substack. Another person that CNN should have kept on forever. And Jim Acosta was talking about how Lindell, the pillow guy, is in the Pentagon press briefings now with his Lindell TV is what they call it.
Lindell TV, yeah.
And you fucking imagine, that's who's asking the questions, and that's who they want asking the questions. They do not want to give information. I'm sorry, I don't have to pussyfoot around it anymore, because I don't work for CBS anymore. So I can say what I already knew before, which I couldn't say, which is they do not want truthful information getting out. And it's sad for the American public, because there's going to be people dying in this conflict, American soldiers, men and women from all cultures and states and places. And we're not going to know the true stories behind the sacrifices they made. And we're not going to know when things happen, whether it's accurate or not, because there's nobody there to witness it at all. So I don't know.
I mean, look, the locals are witnessing it. And I think there was a lot of talk, a number of years ago, probably decades now, of this democratization of news through social media, and people have cell phones and all that. And it's true. I mean, what happened with the raid on bin Laden's compound, right? Like it was reported by a local, just a regular person filming and tweeting it. So, there is some value in that. And I do think in Gaza, we've seen a lot of really good reporting coming out from people. But the problem is that then a lot of people, whether they have agendas or not, sometimes they have political agendas and they just don't believe what they, they don't want to believe what they see. And in some cases, they just don't know if they can believe it. And with AI now and everything else, who the hell knows if, I mean, even the funeral of those, I think it was 163 kids in Iran. I mean, I saw lots of questions saying, this is AI. This looks too perfect. People were like circling, the two boys in the front looked identical. They're like, it looks like this is AI. They were brothers. So, or maybe I saw it was girls, maybe it was girls and sisters, but like they were siblings. I think they were twins. So, there's people will question what is coming in. But, to me, getting someone like, Jeff Newton or Clarissa Ward on the ground who has consistently for decades done really great reporting, and they're saying, I'm witnessing this, I'm telling this to you, it brings a huge amount of credibility. And I think we've lost a lot of that by not having the access, and also the news organizations don't have the budget or in the stomach to do this kind of work often.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we used to have a lot bigger budgets to this kind of stuff when the second Iraq war was out there. I was out there for fucking 4 months before the war kicked off. Yeah. Sitting in a hotel room in Kuwait City, going out and talking to troops as the buildup happened. It certainly wasn't happening like it was now. They actually talked to people, and then people started saying, okay, we're going to do this. And they moved troops into the regions. They had adequate people to protect their forces, made sure they had enough ammunition and rockets so they're not going to run out, things like that. And, and the money was there for CBS to have a whole bureau there for, a month or two before. I was there 2 months before them and trying to work. And I think that, those budgets just aren't there anymore. And I don't know if there's the same appetite for it. I don't know. But I think what's interesting to me, Peter, is that you're seeing this independent media developing, because these, and this takes us to the stuff that got me started in the first place with the whole CBS Bari Weiss situation with, Paramount Skydance taking over. And then now they've just, I guess they're working on the deal to finalize this stuff with Warner Brothers, which would make them owners of CNN.
And Clarissa's boss now.
Clarissa's boss. Can you imagine? And you have, and what's left? ABC and NBC. ABC's run by Disney. They're pretty harmless. But I remember when we were trying to do Chain of Command for a second season on National Geographic, and Disney had just bought that property for National Geographic from Fox, and we were talking about season 2, and the word we heard, and this is, I've never told this story publicly to anybody, was we had we were putting together season 2 for Chain of Command, and they kept me on for like another 3 months after that to develop it. And the president of National Geographic, who I think is still the president of National Geographic, it came down through that leadership group, that, hey, you can do Wicked Tuna for $600,000 an episode, or you could do Chain of Command for roughly 1.2 million per episode, and you're going to get the ratings right around the same spot. So why are we going to do this important work on wars around the world when we can just do Wicked Tuna and nobody's going to get killed? You'll spend half the money, because it takes a lot less money to put a team of people on a boat and watch them go fishing than it does to have 6 armored cars a day at $2,000 a car, and it costs hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s a week to run an operation like that. And so you're still dealing with corporate media, and Disney, and the other thing that Disney said was, they just took over the property, and they said, well, they didn't really want to see any killing on Nat Geo. They're going to try to do a little bit of lions and tigers and bears, oh my, kind of thing, right? So the corporate media is, to me, is still a problem, and we're seeing this new media landscape develop, strangely through people like me. And I don't know, how much it's going to be a part of your world. You're still doing very traditional stuff, but doing it really well. Frontline, by the way, he's got a piece coming out Frontline we can't talk about, but Peter's still doing stuff for Frontline, which I get, you guys know, I've always recommended as a great news organization, probably one of the last outstanding news organizations to do in-depth reporting and documentary work. Peter's producing pieces for them still, but like this new media landscape that's coming out as people are walking away from these billionaires and conservative billionaires who are Trump supporters buying up these networks. It means that there's going to be independent media, and how that shakes out, I don't know. What do you think about that? How's it going to, what's going to happen?
I mean, look, we saw this 20 years ago starting, where ProPublica, Paul Steiger, managing editor of Wall Street Journal, realized that investigative reporting, desks in newspapers were being shut down or being cut back, and said, I'm going to create something independent, and brought Stephen Engelberg to run that. And they've been gangbusters ever since. I mean, they had $30 million to start, which is a great, leg up to get going. But they just get incredible amounts of philanthropic support, as well as regular people. People just send money in because they appreciate the work that they do, and they do incredible reporting. I mean, they've done some of the best reporting on global aid, on the collapse of global aid. I mean, so many areas that other people are not reporting on. I started the Global Reporting Center specifically to look on, try to do global journalism differently and fill the void in foreign desks. I mean, so there are a number of organizations out there that are trying to do this on a philanthropic level, but it's, most of them will fail because it's not sustainable, because you're basically hat in hand every single year saying, to keep the lights on, give us more money. So you really need someone who believes in you, a benefactor, and or a source of income. And as soon as you get a source of income, I mean, what my argument always has been with philanthropists for my center is, as soon as you put, I mean, you articulated it perfectly. As soon as you put the interest of profit at the center, people are going to make these ROI decisions, right? Like the return on investment on Wicked Tuna is better than the return on investment of Chain of Command. Well, if you're a business and you're a business person, if you're not a journalist, you're a business person, which obviously these companies are run by business people. They're not, they might have been at PepsiCo one week and now they're here. And I mean, they're making widgets, right? Like our content is just a commodity for them to sell. And that's fine. It's a business, right? But if you're making business decisions, that they're going to make those decisions. As soon as ratings go down, audiences go down, profit go down, they're going to cut the most expensive thing.
But the other part of that, Peter, is that they're part of the reason that ratings are going down. If you look at the Barry Weiss situation at 60 Minutes, they pulled a piece off the air and she criticized a journalist who has she literally has no broadcast experience whatsoever, and she said there wasn't good and adequate reporting on the story, right? And she said that publicly, and that about 60 Minutes, right? And so she says that, and what do you think that does to the credibility of 60 Minutes? And the fact is that they gave the White House ample opportunity to sit down and respond, and she knew it, and everybody else knew it. And then prior to that, you had the Redstone family there coming in and going, we need to settle this case so that we can get this deal to go through. So we'll settle the 60 Minutes Kamala Harris thing for $16 million plus some free advertising. And that crushed the credibility of 60 Minutes. And nobody on the show in their right mind thought, the broadcast, nobody in the broadcast in their right mind thought that that lawsuit was going nowhere.
No, and same thing with ABC and Stephanopoulos. I mean, they were both frivolous lawsuits.
Stephanopoulos, like, how do you not walk when something like that happens to you, right? I mean,
but my point is that, and you're underscoring it, which is like, once you have the profit at the center of the reason for an organization existing, whether it's a widget making factory or a newsroom, people are going to want to make money, and they're going to make those decisions. And as soon as there's any tight times, investigative desks get closed down, the international desks get closed down, we're the most expensive stuff, so they're going to cut us. And my argument has always been, on the nonprofit level, if you have philanthropic support, we can get that working, and we don't have to look at the bottom line. Right. We don't have to force a story to air. We don't have to force a story to publication. We publish when we're ready to publish and get, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be about volume. It could be about, quality over quantity.
But it takes us down to the sort of from the larger level that we're talking about, down to the sort of this new evolution of this industry is happening now with literally like people like me or Jim Acosta or Heather Cox Richardson. They're not doing on the ground reporting, and I'm very clear to my viewers that I'm not acting as a reporter anymore. Mm-hmm. Like you need to understand that when you guys look at me, you're getting context and analysis and commentary from a guy who's spent a lot of his life in many of these countries. But I'm not doing in-depth reporting, and there's no possible way I have the resources to do that. I have people call me all the time and write me day and night and say things like, why aren't you on this story? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, because this one fact in this story that you got wrong in the message to me would take me 3 months to run down, because I'd have to file a FOIA for it, and I'd have to go to court probably to get that document. And you're just saying it was on this lady's podcast yesterday, so why can't I say it? Well, because in my heart, I'm still a journalist, and I know that libel suits will take your business away from you. And so they don't know that yet. They haven't learned it. So when they write to me and say, why aren't you covering this sexual harassment cam? Like, there's 1,000 cases. I didn't pick the one you liked. And it would take me months. A great story on any one of these cases at 60 Minutes would take months to investigate properly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, and that kind of leads us to where we are in the government now when it comes to graft and, all that kind of stuff. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about our movie, your movie, which I played a tiny part in. Bribe Inc. And you want to, we did put out the trailer today, so people here can see that could have seen the trailer if they wanted to, and they can watch it afterwards because it went to their email for our Substack subscribers. But also, just just so you guys know, it is out there to be watched on Jolt. And for a couple bucks, you can rent Pete's movie and take a look at the largest bribery scandal in global history. And why don't you just talk about that? It's a really great little story about, this massive bribery scheme by two brothers.
Yeah. So, I mean,
by the way, Iranian brothers.
The Iranian brothers. Yeah. I mean, not that that had anything to do with it, I don't think. But, it's interesting when Alexander Rage, now Alexander Addison, is one of the world's leading anti-corruption activists. And I was at a journalism awards event in Washington, D.C., and I was sitting at a table with her. And she said, you make documentaries. I have this incredible story. And she was telling me about this bribery case out of Monaco. And, it's journalists love superlatives. So the biggest, all that's great. But I was like, bribery, does anyone really care about bribery? Like,
and how do you tell it for TV?
How do you tell for TV, but even for anything, it's kind of how the world's done. You got to bribe your way sometimes. And, companies bribe their way into contracts. Like, what's the big deal? It's kind of it's the way business is done. It's a victimless crime, et cetera. I had all those sort of and after talking to her more and more, one, I realized it's a great story, and I'll tell you the kind of synopsis of the story in a moment. But I also reflected back on my own work, as a print reporter, as a radio reporter, a TV reporter. I've done so many stories on, human trafficking, illegal logging, illegal fishing, gun running, all sorts of things, all the bad things in the world that, you and I seem to be drawn to. And I realized in almost all of those stories, there was some element of bribery. AQ Khan's nuclear program in Pakistan, there was bribery. Biowarfare, bribery. South Africa's biowarfare program, bribery. There was all these stories that I was doing that were these big stories, national security stories, law enforcement stories. There was an element of bribery, and I edited it out because I was like, that it seems like a sidebar. We got to be kind of clean and straight with our storytelling. But I was like, okay, wait a minute. All those are the words.
How much time do you have to delve into it?
Right. Yeah. How much time do you have to, and then you confuse people. But I realized there's this common thing, right? If every single bad thing you're reporting on has corruption, at least either at the heart of it or connected to it in some significant way, maybe we should be leaning into corruption. So, I'm old now, and I thought this would be a good challenge. I mean, I've done enough kind of easy stories. So I'm going to challenge myself and try to make this esoteric idea of corruption compelling. And, we were lucky that we had this incredible story of a whistleblower who came forward and said, I work at this company. Basically, there was a story in Australia about Leighton Holdings, which is one of the biggest engineering companies in Australia. And they came clean and they said that they were bribing officials in Iraq to get some major project.
Oil, mostly tied to oil
buoy project done. And so, this reporter I was working with, Nick McKenzie, had written this story, and it was a good story. He's an incredible investigative journalist, big story in Australia, but not worldwide. And then he gets this letter out of the blue in the mail, just snail mail, and saying, good story, but you don't know the half of it. There's a much, much bigger story. If you want to know that story, put an ad in the newspaper, Le Figaro, advertising for a villa in Sydney Harbor, and put a burner phone number, and I'll call you. And he thought it was a prank. I mean, he really did think it was a prank. He's like, whatever, it's 50 euros, whatever, to put this ad in Le Figaro, I'll do it. So he put it in there, put the burner number, and his phone rings, and it's this guy, and he's like, come to France, meet with me, and I will tell you everything. And Nick flew to France, met with him.
Not even knowing what he was going to find out.
No idea. In fact, I mean, what ultimately happened, he gave him very specific instructions. I will meet you by the red newsstand next to the Louvre. He goes there, and this guy never shows up. He calls him up, and he goes, you totally fucked me. You're going to get me fired here. It cost me thousands of dollars to fly here. My editor is going to be like, what's wrong with you, Nick? And he goes, okay. I'll meet you in Marseille. Come down to Marseille. So he goes down to Marseille. Finally, the guy finally meets with him, and he calls him Figaro because, after the newspaper, he calls him Figaro. And basically he gives him this hard drive with like hundreds of thousands of emails. And these emails have coded language, and it's just clear that they're hiding stuff. And as soon as he broke the code, he realized that there are major players in Iraq, in Kazakhstan, in Libya and Algeria, all over, involved in bribery with Halliburton, with Samsung, with
Rolls-Royce.
Rolls-Royce. I mean, huge name companies, and they were going there using these guys as sort of a cutout to bribe officials.
Two Iranian brothers.
Yeah, this company, and to the company that this guy worked for. It was called Unoil in Monaco, and yeah, so basically they were the middleman, which is a reasonable part of the industry. There are facilitators. So it's kind of like, when we might hire a fixer to help us with, coordination in a country. But those middlemen, in this case, were bagmen. And so they were taking the money from the oil companies and passing the money on to officials to get these contracts, to either, basically putting a thumb on the scale, sometimes getting the competitors bids so that they can underbid them, et cetera. And, these guys would probably still be doing this if it hadn't been for this whistleblower who came forward and just revealed it all.
And we're talking, you guys know, we're talking about bribery scandal so big, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars.
It was huge. And the investigator in England, because these guys were British citizens, the investigator in England who Nick had talked to said, he'd never seen anything like this. The biggest task force, the
froze. I think we might have lost Pete there. We might have to get Pete back on the line. Just when it was getting good, right, guys? Pete, we don't have you online anymore, so if you hear me at all, go off and come back on.
We'll take a couple of questions.
Yeah, we'll take a couple of questions while we try to figure out the Peter Klein situation.
All right. That one's for Pete, but you can.
Why don't you read it to me here?
All right. All right. So David wants you to talk about the mood of the Arabs and how it'll change if this war goes on for weeks and months, especially with like water and food not coming in or out.
The mood of Iran?
He said Arabs, but I'm assuming he means Iran.
Well, I mean, obviously, you guys know the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and the Iranians are threatening in that area, and they're trying to get vessels in to try to keep that Strait of Hormuz open. The French are bringing an aircraft carrier in, but it's not just oil that goes through; it's goods and services. And but yeah, when you stop the supply of food, and you hit all the the places where you can get water, which happens frequently in war zones. People get desperate. They get desperate, and then it becomes a humanitarian issue. So, is there a humanitarian plan in place? No, at this point there is not, because we don't know how long it's going to last, and we don't know the resources of that country, what it needs, and is the United States going to be involved in any way of dropping water and food packets, parcels into that war zone to help the Iranian people? I doubt it. I think it's going to be one of those things where you're going to have the United Nations. You're going to have people might be trying to come back on again. I don't know. Not connected. Device is not connected. So yeah, it's one of those situations where things will get very desperate, and people will have a very difficult time. And that it takes a matter of just a couple of weeks for that to happen, because people are going to be stocking up on everything. So next time they go to the shop in a couple of days, nothing's going to be on the stores. Yeah, it's bad. And then also the economic factors. Do you even have money, and can you work in a war zone when things are going on and people are going to pay you? So you can't people just don't give you free things. You still have to, what you will see is a lot of cooperative efforts among communities. The communities will, he's entered the studio. Pete's coming back online. Woo, if we can get him. Yeah.
You just need to add him.
Yeah. There he is. Yeah. Sorry, we lost. Did you know when you dropped out?
I know exactly when I dropped out, and I was thinking, these guys like hack it into my computer. Because the end of the story is that the bad guys got away, so they're still out there. And they basically they were going to be arrested, and they pulled some strings. They got this former DEA agent who was like this sort of high-level kind of secret agent fixer who undermined the entire case, got the case stolen away from the Brits and brought to the United States, where they made a deal with the DOJ. basically to, serve minimal jail time in exchange for information so that the DOJ could go after the companies. And they got these DPAs, these deferred prosecution agreements against these companies. And the companies got fined, whatever, a couple $100 million.
Never these criminal prosecutions against these people. They just get fined and the company pays a fine.
They got fined. It's a speeding ticket for them.
Yeah. But you'll just note that Pete told you the end of his movie. What are you doing? Fucking guy. We're trying to get people to go get your movie.
Yeah, well,
they can go watch it. It's fascinating.
Watch it to learn see the tale unwind. It's a pretty incredible tale.
Well, the interesting thing to me about when I was involved in the movie, obviously I was just trying to track the DC side of things and what they were doing, which never really came out the way we wanted to. But we had, an incredible story from England, and the story for me was interesting was how England and the United States were fighting with each other over jurisdiction, over what was important, to the point where they weren't even cooperating with each other in terms of sharing intelligence on the case.
No, they were supposed to be working together, and they were definitely working at cross purposes. And I mean, in some ways, this whole story seems quaint now, and we get into the idea that Donald Trump had, during his first term, wanted to undermine the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I mean, there's an entire film to be made about the FCPA. This came in 1977, came out of actually a Lockheed case. Up until 1977, bribery was basically you can write it off on your taxes as a business expense. And up until I think in the 80s, in Germany, you could still do that. So this is a relatively new idea that, we're sort of regulating and making bribery and corruption, criminal activity. And we sort of had a good run there for a couple decades of cracking down on it and seeing the real impact of it. Because, what I saw in Iraq, I hadn't been in Iraq in a number of years. And hundreds of thousands of young people are going in the street, marching in the street. Actually, Muqtada al-Sadr, who we talked about at the beginning, has become a real crusader against corruption, saying that, Western companies have come in here. They've basically brought back the old Saddam system. And we talked to this one guy, this anti-corruption guy, who's like, back then we had one Saddam. You knew who to pay. I mean, it wasn't great, but now you have 100 Saddams, and you got to grease 100 palms, and you don't know how much and who's going to turn their back on you. And so it's incredibly chaotic. So you see half-built buildings, and the whole place is, this is one of the, richest, supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world, and yet they're this, backwater because of corruption. So this law, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, was transformative. All these other countries copied it. Pretty much every country in the world has signed, the declarations that they're going to abide by anti-corruption rules. Obviously, a lot of them don't, but Donald Trump tried to get rid of it. He reached out to his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who'd been CEO of ExxonMobil, and he says, I want to get rid of this law. Rex Tillerson was like, no, this is actually a good law. Plus, you can't just get rid of a law. Like, that's not how it works. So he sort of dropped it. But
in the first term.
And it was interesting. When Donald Trump was reelected, I was still at NBC, and I reached out to the person who had been head of the FCPA unit at the DOJ under Trump. And the anti-corruption unit. And he was very involved in this Unowell story, the bribing story. So I reached out to him. I said, what do you think is going to happen in the new term under Trump? Do you think he's going to get rid of the FCPA? Because he tried to last time. And he was spot on. I mean, his predictions, and I wrote a piece for NBC about it. He said, what I think is going to happen is Donald Trump, and he's a fan of Trump. So he's like, I think what Donald Trump's going to do is use this law to advance American interests. Not apply it equally. And we never really applied it equally. So to be fair, but only use it when it advances American interests or his interests. And so they basically mothballed the law. There really is not, it's not this incredible law. It was very well done, well written, and functioning extremely well for decades. They've sort of put it on the back shelf, and they haven't gotten rid of it because I don't think, they can't just do that. But, they can, the DOJ can selectively prosecute. They have, the Attorney General has that discretion.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to take some questions now. We got about 5 minutes left in this, and I'd like to have people have a chance to ask us some stuff. Holly, what do we got?
Well, I think you may have answered this already, Peter, but Allie wanted to know why, with all of the issues in the world, did you choose to focus on skeezy backroom merger deals?
Well, yeah, I mean, Ali
By the
is
way,
right.
my viewers love to ask very pointed questions with the gun pointed straight at our heads, which I love.
And that was exactly my initial instinct, as I said. I mean, it was like, who cares? Like, much bigger things. But as I say, I realized that bribery and corruption is so central to so many of the ills in the world. If we can actually like address that, we might actually be able to curtail all those other, human trafficking, gun running, everything else.
Because they're all tied to this bribery situation, because you have to bribe your way to do those illegal activities.
Yeah.
So if you wrap your brain around the bribery and you can figure out a way to prosecute people who are taking bribes, especially within governments, then you can curtail the criminal activity that leads to those things. So
and it goes beyond that. Our buddy Chris Chivers did a great story a number of years ago. In the Times, there were these two women. They bribed their way through the airport in Moscow, and they got onto these two little planes, small planes, like commuter planes, like, I don't know, 100 people, 50 people. And they blew up both planes. They were Chechen, separatists. They were suicide bombers. And they blew up both planes, and they were able to get the bombs onto those planes because they bribed their way. But okay, so that's one thing. And Chris wrote about that in the Times. But you think about that, if you or I went to, LaGuardia, we couldn't get a bomb on the plane by bribing some official at the TSA. Those two women were able to get on that plane with a bribe because hundreds, maybe thousands of people have, made that pathway. It's like a forest, right? You get to a forest. If 1,000 people have walked the same way, there's a path. And whether
they think no harm, no foul, because it's part of our culture now.
And it's accepted, right? It's accepted. There's a whole, so you see the impact. I mean, those two planes blew up. That was international news. Peter Jennings reported on it. It was like a big story.
Well, you can actually take it a step further and bring it back to our country. You used to have, we talk a lot about immigration, but one of the first things Donald Trump did in his administration is to offer up the gold card for admission, which is nothing more than a state-sponsored bribe. If you're friends with him and you have enough money and he likes you, you can do all sorts of things. Give money to his cryptocurrency, pay money to the U.S. government. Next thing you know, you're in there like swimwear, and you're here legally.
You hear a lot of countries in the past have offered passports for money. So this is not unique, but it's not something the U.S. has done in the past, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have had a program even here in the United States where if you brought a certain number of dollars to the table you were going to spend on business and come in here and put that money into the actual business, therefore you were bringing jobs to Americans, then it was acceptable for a private person to do that in some cases. But this is different. This is just, I'm buying myself a ticket to ride and bringing my family here. So I don't know. He's opened the door for it, and someday I'm going to have my friend Donald Ridings on the show, who works at Covington, and his whole job, it was international bribery. One of the big foremost experts in the world on bribery. And when the whole administration came in and they started getting rid of all these rules and regulations around bribery, I remember talking to Don saying, he's like, yeah, this is going to be weird for our practice. So what else?
We lost it. Facebook froze you guys, so we're losing everyone on there.
Too bad.
Do you think the bribery fines that companies pay are planned into their budgets?
I don't have evidence that it is, but I will say I've done a lot of reporting on the pharmaceutical industry, and I mean, I remember I think it was Pfizer with the Neurontin. I mean, it was the first time they'd ever used RICO to go against a drug company, and I think it was like a 2.5.
And just so you guys know, RICO is the law that allows you to charge people who are involved with conspiracies, criminal conspiracies, and it's oftentimes
mafia, basically.
Yeah, it's oftentimes used for the mafia, and it's been used for gangs in the past. Yeah. And so go ahead. I just wanted to
so they're taking this racketeering mafia thing and they put it on anyway. I mean, that's just sort of a sidebar, but the point is Pfizer paid $2.5 billion, and I know for a fact that they knew that they were going to pay that. And I know from people at Pfizer that they knew they were going to pay that, and the amount of money that they made, marketing Neurontin, gabapentin off-label was so much more, and they just made a ton more money. And it's so, I mean, every company makes this decision. I mean, it goes back to the Fort Pinto, where the 60 Minutes, broke that story of like, Ford made the decision that, you know, some cars are going to blow up because our fuel tank is put in the wrong place, and we're going to get a lot of lawsuits. But the cost of fixing this is more than the cost of all those lawsuits. But those lawsuits have human lives because people are blowing up, right? But you know, businesses are going to make these decisions.
I think we'll take one more for the night here, and then we'll let Peter get back to his life in Vancouver.
Oh gosh, let me see.
Or maybe we'll take two more. She's got a little bit of page here.
Well, I'm trying to bundle these into movie versus other topics. How do you think Kushner is going to handle all the shit he's getting from his business partners in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia? This goes away from the movie and back to the war.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't even know what shit he's getting. I mean, he's basically been getting funding from people there to sponsor his businesses, and he's parlaying that into business ventures while simultaneously being the expert on solving peace in the Middle East. And I don't think that it's obviously a conflict of interest, and he's not a smart enough guy to be able to solve the problems of the Middle East. It's just not his wheelhouse. Not to mention the fact that that's just my opinion. You might have another one. Not to mention the fact that you've got a New York Jew trying to convince the Iranian government that it's in their best interest to make a deal with him.
Yeah. No, I think ultimately, you know, I don't think anyone's smart enough to solve this problem. But yeah, it fundamentally comes down to the conflict of interest. I mean, there's whole new rules that have been written here in terms of conflict of interest. And it is troubling because it's very difficult to run. I mean, there's a reason these rules exist, because it's to protect us. It's to protect the public, the people. Our public officials should be making decisions based upon, what's best for the country, not what's best for them. Yeah. And I mean, look, it's never been perfect. It's never been perfect. There's been plenty of these conflicts in the past in various ways. But
we're seeing him accepted in a way that I've never seen before. You look at Clarence Thomas, and we know at least $4 million worth of favors coming his way with people who have business before the court. And he doesn't even at least have the courtesy to say, I'm going to recuse myself from these cases. And then John Roberts, when he's asked about it, and Congress wants to have some oversight, some ethical oversight, he tells Congress and everybody, oh, big fella, step back. Like, we don't need oversight here. We know how to make the right ethical decisions. And this is a guy who's the head of the United States Supreme Court telling all of us that we're getting it wrong. They shouldn't be taking this stuff. I mean, I remember talking to one time a Wall Street Journal reporter many years ago, and we were talking about what you could and couldn't accept when you're talking to sources and stuff like that. Like, like I would buy a source a lunch, and the source would say to me, well, I can't have you buy me a lunch. And we would argue over whose lunch it was. And should we just get separate bills? And my rule was, I'll buy lunch this time and you buy lunch next time. And it's all off in the wash. At least we're ethically clean, both of us. Mm-hmm. But this Wall Street Journal reporter said, I can't take a pen from someone. And, where are those days? Yeah. What else?
As journalists, what's your view on the kids coming up in journalism school now? Do you think they want to be rebels and report the truth, or are they being trained to be Fox News?
Well, I don't think being a rebel and reporting the truth are the same thing. I think being a rebel is an advocate for things that's not what their job is. Their job is to find the truth, get as close as they can to the truth, and tell that story. And that's not a job of a rebel.
Well, today it is.
Yeah. Even like you'll hear me be very careful about what I'm saying. Like I will report what I've heard, but a lot of it's secondhand information from secondhand sourcing or the New York Times or whatever. But I may be advocating certain things because politically I think they're the right thing now. But when I was a journalist working for 60 Minutes, and I may have had opinions based on my experience of seeing things happen in front of me, you had to be very careful about how you reported things because, and not in a protective way against the truth, but you had to make sure you hit the truth on the head and you told things from the perspective that was fair. And so I don't think rebel reporters necessarily have that necessarily in mind. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a huge change. So I started teaching journalism actually when I was still at 60 Minutes. I taught it at Columbia, the TV magazine course, and this is more than 25 years ago. Now I still teach at University of British Columbia in Canada. I've seen a huge change in students in those two and a half decades. A lot of young people coming in wanting to be journalists, and these are both graduate programs, so they're not kids, but they're they're coming in without really understanding the line or caring. Maybe they understand, but they don't care about the line between journalism and advocacy. And I would say that's 80% of the students coming up feel that way. And I've done at first I fought it. I fought it hard, really hard. I was like, you can't be an advocate, you have to be a journalist. And then I realized what are they consuming? They're consuming this, right? They're consuming TikTok. They're consuming, really smart people who have really strong points of view, who are informing them. Even if, The Daily Show, like Stephen Colbert, like those are all sources of news today, which have a very strong perspective, in a way that I think when you and I are coming up, we wouldn't have considered those things news. Plus, the job market is such that some of my best students are working in public affairs now. Now that they're not working for Exxon, they're working for an environmental lobby or whatever, but and they're using their skills, their storytelling skills, to advance things they care about, and they might come back into journalism. So people go back and forth between advocacy and journalism all the time. And most newsrooms these days welcome that. They're fine, or at least they certainly tolerate it. So I think the world has changed. I think the world has changed between those two areas. And I think those of us from a previous generation, and certainly those of us who are in like leadership roles, like I was at NBC, have to figure out how to deal with that. And I mean, it was a big issue when the war started in Gaza, where a number of younger journalists at NBC wanted to push it, even slightly, write a headline a certain way. I will say that the standards people at NBC News are the best I've ever dealt with in my entire career. And they handle this really well. They didn't come in saying like, Father knows best. We worked with the younger journalists. We talked to them. We acknowledged, we understand where you're coming from, but also the audience needs to kind of have neutral news to be able to trust us. And I think they handled it, frankly, incredibly well, given that generational shift.
I think we're going to probably finish up here. I just want to thank my homie Peter Klein for coming on tonight, and probably missing his dinner for us because he's 3 hours behind us. But Pete, it's good talking to you, and continued success with your film. And everybody, remember, go look it up on Jolt TV, or no, Jolt. It's not Jolt. Jolt.film. Yeah. And pick it up for a couple bucks and take a look at it. So you can kind of see the work that Peter does. Amazing investigative reporter and a wonderful friend of mine. So we'll have him back on maybe in the future when we talk about other subjects, and maybe next time your film comes out on Frontline, we'll have you back on.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. And like, follow, and share, and go over to Substack if you're any of those folks that are unpaid subscribers. Go to the paid subscription so I can feed my dogs. Y'all take care. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.